Well, hello everybody. I'm Sarah Harries. Welcome to this webinar on behalf of the APM Benefits Management SIG. Just quickly an introduction to myself. I'm Sarah Harries. I'm a long-standing member of the Benefits Management SIG Committee, and I've got over 12 years experience in benefits management within the private and public sectors. I'm a massive fan of benefits mapping for all sorts of reasons. Judge will probably cover a few of those. There are various styles of benefits mapping around, and there are often debates about the best styles and methods for drawing them, using brown paper and post-it notes or using the most sophisticated drawing and database tools. This session isn't going to cover technical tools. It is going to focus on some of the basic principles that apply no matter what tool or style you end up using. Now, before we get stuck into Judge's presentation, I do have a quick question for you all from the Benefits SIG, and that's going to go to a poll. Early in next year, we're going to start launching a series of bite-sized guides to benefits management, and we're going to focus each one on a different element of the natural life cycle of programs. The first one is going to be called Defining Success, and we would like to get your opinion on the vital areas to cover in this particular bite-sized guide, bearing in mind each bite-sized guide is only going to be about 4 pages. So can you let us know which of these headings or sections you would expect to see in such a bite-sized guide? 83% of you have said that you would like to see the how to define desired outcomes, and 68% on identifying strategic objectives, 54% on the relevance of benefits mapping at this stage, and 44% on the strategic outline case, which if you don't work in the public sector you may not be familiar with. Okay, well that's really useful. Thank you very much. The objectives of this particular session today are to cover the what, why and how of benefits mapping. And the main reason we're all here, of course, is to hear Judge's presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Judge. Judge is our guest speaker. In fact, I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself in a moment. He's going to be presenting us with his take on the subject of benefits mapping.
Hopefully you are now seeing a little slide with a picture of me. So good morning, good afternoon and good evening to you all. Thank you very much for taking an hour out of your day. I do hope that I'll provide you of something of value in this next hour in exchange for your time. So I'm Judge Matharu. I've been judge for nearly 30 years, I think now, but my full name is Jagjeevan. Either of those names is fine. Very similar to Sarah, really. I've been involved in benefits management for around 10 to 12 years, private sector, public sector, and one of my kind of particular slants, shall we say, is that I do like to look at it very much from a practical and pragmatic view, and that kind of leads me on to a little bit of a health warning about what I'm going to go through. Because I tend to look at benefits management from that practical and pragmatic viewpoint, I can tend to drift a little bit away from the ideal kind of theoretical world. So apologies in advance if I kind of say things or use terminology which doesn't fit perfectly with some of the things you may already be very familiar with. One of the things that I did do a couple of years ago, based on my experience, I decided that I would write a book. So I wrote a book. It's called Practical Benefit Realization Management, and it was done with a view to showing benefits management and how it can be done in a real-world scenario rather than purely from a theoretical world. And one of the things that I'm also very keen on is sharing that knowledge and experience through events like this, through webinars. Now, before I begin, I just want to get a sense of who's on the call. So I'm now going to attempt to do a poll, which is to get a view of your experience or knowledge of benefit maps. And the question here is just, how would you characterize your own view of your knowledge and experience of benefit maps? Right, so you should be seeing the results here, and you can see, I guess not too unsurprisingly, given the nature of the webinar, which is an introduction to benefit map, we've got 23%, roughly about a quarter of you with no experience, 57% low, 90% medium, and there is 1% of you with some high experience, which is very good. So thank you very much for that. Before I start to look at what a benefit map is, first thing I want to consider is when would you be looking at doing a benefit? When is it appropriate? And if I think about a benefit management process, a generic benefit management process, which is the one I like to use, for any benefits, you go through a process where you identify them, you define them, you plan for their realization, and then you realize them. There's those simple 4-step process for any benefits on any change initiative. And benefit maps very squarely sits within identify. Benefit mapping is predominantly a tool and a technique that you can use to help consider and identify benefits for any particular change initiative. So that's where it sits in terms of the process for benefits management. But in terms of a project management life cycle, when might you be doing a benefit map? Well, ideally a benefit map would be considered before a change is considered, to help identify and define the benefits and help actually to shape and construct the change, and for example to help inform the business case. That's the ideal scenario, so you do it before the change is even happening. However, benefit maps can be done at any stage. Certainly I've been involved in benefit maps after a change has commenced, because benefits may not necessarily have been identified or considered in a complete manner. I've also been involved in doing benefit maps after a change has been completed. So all the change has been delivered, all the features, the capabilities have been delivered, but there was never any consideration of benefits, and benefit mapping can be used as a mechanism to then identify the potential benefits that could arise from that change. So what is a benefit map? It's a picture. It's a picture which summarizes the whole change, and it identifies broadly what I would normally highlight as 3 key areas, 3 key elements within a map. The enablers, these are the things, the stuff that a change project might be delivering, which could enable benefits. So you have these things called enablers. You have the benefits and disbenefits, which could result from those enablers, and you have the ultimate objectives that you're trying to contribute towards and achieve. And a benefit map is those key items on a single visual page. And it might look something like this. So this is a very generic looking benefit map, and I'm just going to talk through the key elements that you can see in this map. Firstly, on the far left-hand side here, you've got these blue boxes, which are referred to as the enablers. So these are the things, the stuff, the features, the capabilities, the outputs, whatever you want to call them. These are the things that a specific change project or change initiative is delivering, and it's these enablers which could enable benefits or disbenefits. In the middle section, then, you've got those benefits and disbenefits shown. These are the green box. The green box is clearly for benefits, they're positive. Red box is for disbenefits. So it's important not to forget, and it's actually, I'd be very surprised if there weren't any in any change initiative. There are normally some negative results from those. Those are the red boxes. So you have the benefits and disbenefits which could result from those enablers, and over on the far right-hand side, then you have the objectives. What was that change project originally conceived to achieve? What was its ultimate objective? And those are shown on the far right-hand side. Now, what you can also see in between all those items are the links, the little arrows showing all the connections between all those items. And I'd also highlight the colors that I'm using here. These are very generic colors that I tend to use, and I think you'll find them broadly consistent across many of the different types of benefit maps. You'll see blue for enablers, green and red for benefits and disbenefits, and yellow for objectives. Now, in this map here, I've shown it very cleanly and very tidily, with all my blue stuff on the left-hand side, my green and red stuff in the middle, and my yellow stuff on the right-hand side. And that's good for just a generic version like this, but for a real map, which you'll see in a little while, it doesn't won't necessarily be this clean. It doesn't need to be this clean, and that will become evident as we look at an example later. One really key important principle that is kind of really summarizes what a benefit map is all about is each of these individual links, which I tend to refer to as benefit chains. And these are the chains which show the connection between an enabler, something that you're delivering, and the objective. And it shows that connection, that chain between the different benefits that are delivered as a consequence of that, which ultimately contributes to the objective. So these benefit chains are really the core construct of a benefit map. Sarah mentioned just near the beginning that there are variants of benefit maps. There are variants of the kinds of elements that might be shown in a benefit map. And what I'm showing you here is typically what I would do. And I think it's also fair to say that these would be the core elements, the minimum elements that you might have in a benefit map. MSP, for example, if you're familiar with managing successful programs, on their benefit maps, they talk about outputs, capabilities, outcomes, benefits, and objectives. And they have some definition around each of those. But I think if you can consider these elements here as really the core minimum that you should have in a benefit map, then I think that's a good way to proceed. So I just want to now explore this concept of a benefit chain in a bit more detail and with some examples. So if I think of an example, let's say I've got a little project. It's part of an IT solution, perhaps, which is going to automate a particular step in a process. So that's my enabler. It's one of my blue boxes, a bit of process automation. What might that result in terms of benefits? Well, because it's automated something that was perhaps being done manually, a benefit that could result from that is a reduction in the time then to complete the process. It's now being done automatically. And if that process related to the repair of a service, for example, reducing that time in one step in the process could result in an increase in the service being repaired to specific service level agreements, so meeting specific standards that have been agreed with customers. And if we are increasingly doing that, that could contribute to an increase in customer satisfaction, which might be an overall objective that we've got in that particular example. So that's a simple example of one of those benefit chains, showing the connection between the enabler, a process automation in this case, and customer satisfaction, the objective in this particular example. Now, that same process automation could result in other benefits. So it could, because it's removing manual activity, manual effort, it could also result in a reduction in the effort to operate the process. We no longer need as much effort to do that because that particular activity has now been removed, it's automated. And that could contribute to a reduction in the cost to repair the services. And that could then contribute to another objective, which may exist, which is to reduce costs in some form. So these examples show the benefit chains, and it's a collection of these benefit chains, which is a benefit map. That's all a benefit map is. Now, one of the things you may have picked up on my language as I've been talking, and I've been talking through these benefit chains, is I've been talking about how as you move from one item in the chain to the next item, that could happen, or it may happen. I haven't said that it will happen. And that's by design, because typically there'll need to be some other kinds of interventions. There may be some of the interventions needed to make the next item in the chain occur. So, for example, if I'm going to reduce costs, and based on a reduction in the effort required to operate services, well, I might have to do something to realize that. I might have to reconfigure my resources so that I can make a certain resource spare and available, which I can then move on to do other work or release from the organization. So it's in any of these chains, typically it will be a proper description would be to say that it could lead to the next item in the chain, not that it will. Just completing that particular example, if I now combine those, in a benefit map format, it might look just something simple like this, where I've got two chains resulting from that particular enabler. So that's the kind of key concepts around what a benefit map is. And I'm just going to show you a simple little example here, and I'm going to use an example which is not a kind of business related one, but more of a personal one. So I've selected an objective, and this is for myself, for example, to reduce my personal CO2 footprint. And I may, to create a benefit map, which I'll come onto in a short while, I may sit down with my family, for example, to do this, and I would come up with a benefit map which could look something like this. Now what you can see here is that concept of the benefit chains, one enabler contributing to a specific benefit, that benefit enabling another benefit, and so on through to the end objective. One of the things that I want to highlight with this example, as you're kind of browsing and looking at it, I really want to highlight the importance of the objective. The objective on here, it's specifically defined as to reduce my personal CO2 footprint, or my family's or my household CO2 footprint. If I changed the description there, it would affect the rest of the benefit map. So for example, if I change that description to not say footprint, but to say emissions, to reduce my CO2 emissions, that's quite important, because what that would do to this map is it would remove that third benefit at the bottom of the map there, increasing CO2 offset, because increasing my CO2 offset doesn't play a part in reducing my personal CO2 emissions. And the reason I want to mention that is it is when you're developing a map, when you're considering a map, the objective that you are trying to achieve is really critical. Defining that and making sure it's clearly defined is fundamental, because it will shape the rest of the benefit map. Now, this is a relatively simple benefit map. It's not very complicated. I could make it a lot more complicated or develop it more, because there's things I haven't considered in this map. So for example, if I reduce the amount of fuel I'm using in my house, because I've insulated my house, that could have a financial implication. It could reduce my costs. So there's a potential linkage from reduction in use of fuel into a financial benefit. And if I'm doing more walking and cycling to reduce the number of CO2 releasing journeys, well, that potentially has a disbenefit, because that would take me potentially longer then to travel to locations, and if I'm traveling longer, that I may consider that to be a disbenefit. So I've kept this relatively simple, but you can hopefully start to see that if you, as you start to look at the items in here, you could start to develop it further. Okay, so hopefully that's kind of giving you a flavor then of what a benefit map is. There's kind of key principles involved in a benefit map, and there's a simple example here which shows you what one might look like. But why? What's the point of it? Why bother? Is it worth any time and effort? And really, certainly from my perspective, and I think Sarah mentioned this as well, for me it is probably one of, if not the most useful, the most valuable, the most powerful tool that I've come across within benefits management, within the benefits management toolkit. And it's certainly the one I've used the most, and would continue to use. And why is that? I think from the examples you've seen and the concept of it, you can see that it would, firstly, it will show you all the potential enablers that you could be considering for any change initiative to achieve certain objectives. The process you go through to create one, which we'll look at in a short while, will help you consider and identify all the enablers. It gives you that line of sight. Now, this is really, I found this to be really powerful, because by the line of sight, what I mean by that is it gives you that linkage and the connection between an enabler, something you're working on, a feature or capability that a change is going to deliver, and how that contributes to the overall objective. I've certainly been involved in conversations with people working on change projects where they've said, "Oh, Judge, I don't understand how what I'm working on fits in and how it kind of contributes to the overall objectives that I know the change is looking at." And a benefit map is just perfect for providing that line of sight. If you create a benefit map and you do it in a very holistic way, the process can help you identify all the potential benefits and disbenefits, and you can then decide which ones you want to take forward, which won't necessarily be all of them, but the process is very powerful in helping you tease out and identify benefits which you almost certainly would not have considered otherwise. I think without exception, every single time I've been involved in working on a benefit map, it's always resulted in the identification of benefits that the people and the key stakeholders involved hadn't thought about originally. So it's a great way of holistically trying to draw out all the potential benefits. You've seen on the map that you can then highlight all the key relationships. It shows all those key relationships, and I really want to stress the word there, key. What you don't want to do with any benefit map, I think, is try to identify and draw in every single relationship, because all that happens, and I've seen these, is you end up with a bit of a spaghetti nightmare. There's very little value in having, hundreds of lines on your map, and there may be for valid reasons in that there is a little bit of a relationship between lots of items or many items on the map. But the point with a benefit map I've found certainly is you want to capture those one or two key relationships only. The example that you saw, I think, looked quite neat and tidy, and certainly my maps that I've worked on and I create generally do tend to look like that, and that's because I just focus on those one or two key relationships rather than trying to draw in and tease out every single minute relationship that exists. A benefit map is a fantastic way of identifying and informing indicators. Now, by indicators, what I essentially mean is measures, but what I'm referring to here is the concept of thinking about lead and lag indicators. So on a benefit map, if you look on the right-hand side, you will tend to have your overall objective. And typically, for example, financial benefits would be over on the right-hand side. They will be the result of other benefits that have been realized. So you might see a reduction in your operations costs, but typically that will happen as a result of some benefits which have to be delivered earlier. And those earlier benefits can then be identified as lead indicators. They are measures that you can establish for your change project, which you can start to monitor and check that they're moving in the right direction, so that you know you are on track towards achieving, for example, a financial benefit. So this concept of being able to use a benefit map to tease out and identify both lead and lag indicators is really extremely powerful. Prioritization. This is a really powerful addition to a benefit map that you can all use, and I'm going to cover that separately. So I'm just going to park that there as a really powerful little bit of value, and I'm going to go through that in detail. The concept here, however, is that if you've got a change project and you've got options about what you could be doing, there are different elements that would inform what you decide to do. And one of those elements will be, well, which ones of these options that I have, which one will give me the most benefit? So there's the benefit input into a prioritization discussion. And what I'm going to show you is how you can use a benefit map to inform that benefit input into prioritization. And finally, really a really important bit here is communication. Hopefully from what you've seen, the concept of having the whole change on a single visual map is really, really powerful. To be able to put that in front of anybody and say, who asks a question about the change, and just show them, here's the change. This is, you can see all the enablers, you can see all the benefits that are going to be delivered and the objectives. It's an extremely powerful communication tool, particularly, for example, if you're talking to seniors, and the seniors, of course, or anyone actually likes pictures, and if you can show them a picture of what your change is and what it's going to deliver, I think that's an extremely powerful communication tool. Before we look at the detailed process of creating a benefit map, I want to just look at the different approaches you might use. And firstly, one option you have, which I would thoroughly recommend, by the way, is that you do one by yourself. Creating a benefit map by yourself for a change project that you're working on now, perhaps, it's something that you could, straight after this call, you could pick up a template and you could start having a go. And I would thoroughly recommend that. I've done that many times myself as a brainstorming exercise, it's fantastic to just brainstorm, perhaps in advance of a meeting even. I found it extremely useful, and it's a great way of just to start experiencing what a benefit map looks like and starting to play with it. So I'd thoroughly really recommend that you do take the time and effort as soon as possible after this call, really, if you can, to have a go at creating a benefit map. The other option is to do it with a few others. So this might be, perhaps you have a project team or a change team. So you may decide to get the team together and collectively create a benefit map around the change initiative that you're working on. Probably the most powerful, the most useful, most valuable way of creating a benefit map is in a workshop. And this is where is a much more formal process where you pull in and involve others from the organization, the key stakeholders who are going to be impacted and affected by the change. They're involved in the process of developing a benefit map, and that again it's a very powerful engagement process, part of the engagement process of pulling people in and getting ownership when they've been involved in creating the benefit map that a change is working on. So those are your three options, and I say really recommend do have a go yourself. And at the end, I'll show you, give you some information about some templates that you can get hold of to do that. Right, so let's get to the nitty-gritty now. How do you, let's think of an example. If I consider an example, let's say I've got an objective to reduce some operating costs, and it's got some dimensions around it. Let's say it's good to reduce operating costs by $1 million per annum. Now, typically, and this is the most common example that I've been involved in again, is that typically there will already be things going on which have been identified which might be contributing to a particular objective. So in this case, I'm showing an example where there is already a project in motion. It's an engineer call-out improvement project, and that's been identified as something that could have an impact on reducing operating costs. So that's the most common example, and this is the way you would create a benefit map, is you would identify any of those projects and put them over on the left-hand side together with your objective on the right-hand side. And then you would work through a process from left to right to complete the benefit chain. What is it that the engineer call-out improvement project is going to deliver, or benefit-wise, what benefits would result from it, which ultimately could contribute to reducing operating costs. So, for example, an engineer call-out improvement project that could result in a reduction in wasted engineer visits. Perhaps we're sending engineers out to fix faults when they're not really required to go out to fix faults, and the fault could be centrally fixed. And if we have a reduction in wasted engineer visits, well, we could reduce then the costs for engineer visits, and that could contribute to my objective of reducing operating costs. So this is kind of the left to right approach you could use if you have any blue boxes, any enablers which are already have been identified. What you then do is go from right to left, and you think about your objective, and you think about what else, benefit-wise, what other benefits could be realized to help contribute to reducing operating costs. So as well as engineer visits, there may be other central operational resource that we have who are managing the operations, and that resource could be reduced. And how might that be reduced? Or perhaps there's, in our particular environment, in this particular example, there's lots of manual activities which are being done. And if we could reduce those manual activities, we could reduce our costs. And that might lead to the idea of looking at some form of IT automation to remove some of those manual activities. And again, now I can go from left to right. I can look at the IT automation and say, well, what else might that give me if I go, if that IT automation is delivered? Well, if it's reducing manual activities, and it will reduce the time, for example, maybe to provision a service. So that might increasingly will provide services to meet customers' requirements, and that might contribute to an increase in customer satisfaction, which is another objective, which may not be my primary objective that I'm considering for this benefit map, but I'm capturing it as another potential benefit chain and another potential outcome. And this process of left to right and right to left, I would just continue this process until I get to a point where I feel that in terms of my core objective, which is to reduce operating costs, I feel I've identified kind of everything I can do, and I've got all the chains identified, which give me a view of all the potential enablers and projects that I might want to consider. Now, I mentioned the different approaches. You can do it yourself, you can do it with a small group just within the project team, but the most powerful way, the most valuable way is to do it in a workshop. So I just want to touch on what that process could look like and what you'd need to do. So if you're going to run a workshop, one of the very important considerations is having a facilitator, someone who can manage that process for you. And I think my key message here would probably be that you want a facilitator who has some experience, someone who's done this before, at least initially until you can get familiar with the idea. And the other thing I think personally is of value is to have someone who's independent, someone who doesn't have any knowledge or involvement in the chain, who can then facilitate that really from an independent third-party perspective, because they can then ask the questions, they can challenge, probably in a way that someone who's involved in the change may not be able to. So having a facilitator, someone who's experienced and someone who's independent. Running a workshop, you then got to think about who needs to be involved, and that would be a case of identifying the key stakeholders who might be affected and impacted by the change. A couple of considerations here is, who do you need to involve? And that might be considerations in terms of kind of their breadth of knowledge, their depth of knowledge, the departments they're involved in, all these kinds of considerations to identify who needs to be involved. And the other important consideration is how many. A workshop with about half a dozen people, that's going to be great. You can be very productive. A workshop with a dozen people, or a dozen or more people, is going to be less productive, more difficult to manage. So you're going to think very carefully about who you involve and how many, and ensure that it's kept to a manageable number. To do this in a workshop, all you really need is lots of post-it notes, and you'll have the post-it notes in the colors of the benefit map, and a wall or a big white sheet put on the wall that you can then use to go through that process that I just showed you before, working from the objectives right to left, working from the enablers left to right, completing a first view of the benefit map. And importantly, if you're doing this, you don't draw anything in until near the very end of the workshop. The point of using post-its is that they will move around a lot, or everything will move around again and again and again and again, and it'll be a process where they'll eventually settle down. And it's only once they're settled down and you're comfortable in the final position and you're comfortable with your view of all the benefit chains that you then draw in the connection. So that's running a workshop, whichever kind of mechanism you're using, whichever approach you're going to use to do a benefit map, just some important considerations to think about. Firstly, as a generic, and this is really a generic rule anyway for benefits, but if you're writing it on a post-it map or you're typing it into your PowerPoint template for a benefit, every benefit, ideally, it should start with an appropriate benefit adjective. So something like faster, slower, increased, reduced, more, less. So which clearly then defines it and identifies it as a benefit and not as an enabler or an objective. So make sure that as you're creating this, every green sticker, every red sticker starts with one of those words, which clearly then makes sure it's a benefit or a disbenefit. And that's the other next key consideration, is not to forget benefits. The amount of benefit maps I've seen where conveniently there's no red boxes shown is quite remarkable. And of course, it's almost inevitable. I'd be very surprised if there are not any negative outcomes from every change, any change that's been involved. And by making sure they're identified, you can then manage them and mitigate them. And that's the point of ensuring that benefits are identified. So specifically, as you're going through the process, to ask the question about disbenefits, I'd thoroughly recommend and make sure that that's built into the process. Another consideration commonly is when I've been involved in this, people who are thinking about benefits, they will identify more than one in one go. They will say something like, we'll have a faster and cheaper process. And those faster and cheaper, well, those are two benefits. There's a faster process and a cheaper process. And in that case, you want to split them out. And as you're building a map, you want to make sure that each benefit is unique. And that's important because different benefits will have different relationships and different linkages. And if you've got more than one bundled together, you're losing sight of that. So it's quite important to make sure you're getting the maximum insight to make sure you have individual unique benefits. And finally, the other key consideration is time. Do not underestimate how much time this will take. If I'm running a workshop, I would make sure I allow half a day, a full morning or a full afternoon. And typically it will take that amount of time. So don't underestimate how much time it will take to create a benefit map. Right, I want to come back now to prioritization. If I go back to my example, this is my personal one. This is to reduce my CO2 footprint. I can see some of the key benefit chains, but what I can't see, there's no information there which is giving me any sense of relative importance or relative priority. How important is it for me to travel by train for my holidays compared to insulating my attics and walls? Which ones of those are more important? Are they the same? So as a simple prioritization process you can work through on any benefit map. And this process starts by considering every connection on the benefit map from the right-hand side and putting in a weighting, a percentage weighting. So over here on the right-hand side, we've got 3 benefits, and each of those would be given a percentage weighting. So at every level, it should add up to 100%. So in this case, for example, what this is highlighted is that, and this may be me sitting down with my family and we're considering these different elements, and we said, well, you know what, increasing CO2 offset, we really don't think that's going to have much, we're not that way inclined, we don't think that's going to have much of an impact, so it's given a low weighting of 10%. And even just with that little percentage weighting, it's already provided some relative prioritization information for us. But what you do is, working from right, you continue to add those percentage weightings all the way through to the left-hand side, and you make a judgment. And you can see there, when you're doing this, it's not about being 21% or 21.5%. It's 80-20, 50-50, 60-40. It's at that level. You don't want to try and make it too much of a science, otherwise you'll be there forever. And the first step in this process is to identify those weightings all the way through to the left. And clearly, if there's only one link, as there are in some of the examples here, then it's 100%. Once you've got that prioritization weighting information added, you're then going to overlay that and use that information with a point scoring system. And what you do is you allocate your objective a certain amount of points. And in this case, a good common number to use is something like 1,000. So that 1,000 represents that objective. It represents achieving that objective. And what you do is you use the percentage weightings to flow those points back from right to left. So at the first level, those 1,000 points split 500, 400, and 100, based on the 50%, 40%, and 10%. At the next level, I then take those 500 points and I flow them back to the next level based on the percentage weightings of the individual links. So they then become 50, 250, and 200. And this continues until you get to the far left-hand side of your map, where every item now on the map has been given a score. It's those 1,000 points have now been flowed back all the way through to the left-hand side. When I've got to this stage, all the blue boxes now on here, all of my enablers, the points on all of those will add up to 1,000 points, just because of the nature of the process that we've gone through. So this now gives me some information about the relative importance of those individual components of my change. So if I look at the top 3, for example, here, there's 3 items there which add up to roughly about 750. So 3/4 of my objective, based on these weightings that I've used, 3/4 will be achieved by these 3 little projects. So then I might then make some decisions or feed that information into another process, which is looking at the prioritization overall. And this is how you can use a benefits led process, a benefits led view to identify some information to feed into a prioritization process. Now that covers the main content I wanted to go through. I hope I've given you enough information, to understand the importance of a benefit map, the value it gives you, the key concepts and principles around a benefit map, specifically a focus around prioritization and how that can be used, how you can use the benefit map to inform that. And I would thoroughly recommend, as I mentioned before, please do go away and have a go. If you go to, I have my own website, it's called apmbenefitsmanagement.com. If you go there, there are templates available. There's a PowerPoint one, a Visio one. They're the tools I tend to use. There are also some more examples you'll find there of benefit maps. So please do have a go. I would strongly recommend it. If you do want some more, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find me, just search for my name. Email me directly on this email address. And I just want to finish with another poll. And I just want to find out, based on what I've shown you, based on the information within this presentation, I want to get a view of how likely you are, or not, to have a go at building a benefit map. We've got 80% of people have voted. So this is, this is fantastic. So just nearly a third of you, hopefully now, going to go away, given how many of you had no experience of a benefit map. 30% are extremely likely to, 53% very likely to. That's over 80%. I think my reading into that will be that you will almost certainly go away and have a go, which is fantastic. For the people who have said no way, that's fine. I understand that. I'm sure it's not everyone's cup of tea, but yes, thank you very much for that. I'm really pleased that you will go away and have a look, and please do go and have a play. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I'm sure you'll learn a lot by having a go, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of value from it. Thank you. Sarah, I think that's me done. Shall I hand over back to you?
Well, thank you very much, Judge. I just wanted to, before we go into the question and answer session, I just wanted to ask you one more question on behalf of the APM. Have you found this session useful? So extremely and very and somewhat. It's all very positive. One person said not very, and thankfully nobody said it was a waste of their time. So that's really good news. Thank you very much for the presentation then. Hopefully we're now going to go through some questions and answers for Judge. If you want to ask a question that you haven't yet asked, please use the question section on your right hand side. There's a little illustration of what it looks like there. We have received quite a few questions, probably more than we're going to have time to cover. So I'm going to try and prioritize some of them. Those that we don't answer on the call, please rest assured that we will be answering all of your questions. We'll publish the Q&A with the slides and the recording of this presentation afterwards. So if I don't get to your question right now, we will get to it later, so please rest assured on that. So, Judge, some really interesting questions have come through. Great, thank you. So, first of all, when you were covering the benefits mapping, John Davies asked whether you would typically include in the map side benefits that don't contribute to the stated objective.
Okay, yes, so very good question. So, I think one of the things I mentioned is that the whole benefit mapping process can be quite holistic. It will almost certainly identify benefits or disbenefits, in fact, which don't necessarily link to or contribute to your main objective. Now, as part of the benefit mapping process, personally, I would definitely identify them. What I then do with them after that is then up to me. So, for example, I might decide to include some of those benefits which don't contribute to my main objective as part of, for example, the narrative which I'm putting together with to justify that particular change. So it's not contributing to the objective that I want to achieve, but it's part of the wider narrative, which says actually this has these other benefits, but we're not going to, as part of this change, we're not going to measure and track them and ensure they're realized, but we would expect them to be realized. So it's really, it is one of those it depends questions in terms of what you do with those side benefits. I would certainly identify them. How I then take them forward, well, it depends on the situation and the context.
Okay, thank you. In a similar vein, Anthony Cloak has asked whether you would group benefits into intermediate and final.
Okay, yes. So this is thank you. There is some additional terminology which which you've just started to allude to there. So intermediate benefits is the kind of generic phrase that would be used for those leading benefits, those earlier benefits, which would ultimately contribute towards end benefits. That's the other terminology, the end benefits, which are the ones which will be directly contributing to the objective. So that's certainly those kinds of classifications. Yes, I've seen them and I've used them, and if that's appropriate, then absolutely I would group them and order them as such.
Okay, thank you. Right, two slightly more complex questions. Luke Marshall has explained that he's a program manager, so he's responsible for many projects, delivering many objectives. So if he had one benefit map for the whole program, it would understandably become very complicated. So is there a way to make it fairly simple to follow for a large, complex program? What would you recommend in that sort of situation?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think so. In that situation, what I would suggest is you have different levels of benefit map. So each project within your program, it would have its own benefit map. Each project would have its own objective. So in essence, it would then have its own benefit map, and that would be the detailed level of benefit map that exists for each individual project. At the program level, what I would think about doing then is having each of those objectives for each project would then appear on my program level benefit map as a benefit at the program level. So an increase in a reduction in costs might be one of the benefits that I'm looking to achieve across a number of projects at a program level to ultimately to achieve some kind of program level objective. So essentially my suggestion there is you would have different levels, project level and program level, and there is a third level, by the way, which is portfolio level, so you could have multiple programs within a portfolio. Hope that helps.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Thanks, Judge. Rebecca Casey has asked, in a pluralist organisation, you don't want to risk excluding stakeholders. Therefore, what do you think about producing multiple benefit maps for different stakeholder groups, but for the same project?
Ooh, that's a very interesting question. My instinctive response to that is there's some issues or potential challenges with that, in that you're giving perhaps skew. One of the things I love about benefit maps, by the way, if I just a bit of a digress, but benefit maps are extremely transparent. I love the fact that they are transparent. They put everything out there for anybody to see, and I would get nervous about cutting bits out for different audiences because it's giving them a bit of a skewed view. I've never had to do that, so I'm not sure I can give you a proper answer to that, but that would be my nervousness in providing different views to different stakeholders.
Okay, I mean, I can add something from my own point of view. In that situation, if, for instance, you're talking to the CFO, you might want to highlight the bits of the benefits map that are relevant to the finances of the organisation. Rather than, as Judge says, rather than making bits of it invisible, I would just highlight the bits that are relevant to that stakeholder. Okay, another question. This one is from Abu Sadat Mohammed has asked if there are standard formats for benefits mapping that are widely used. So is there a standard that an organisation might expect you to use, for instance?
Okay, very good question. So I think this is, I think we touched upon it a little bit during the presentation. There are essentially different formats, different approach is. I mentioned the Managing Successful Programs one, and their content on their benefit map is slightly richer. They have other items on there. There's benefit dependency mapping, and I can't remember all the terminology off the top of my head now, but there are different formats, different approaches, and it's really what's appropriate and suitable for you in your context. Is what I've covered here is really the core principles of, if you like, the bare bones of a benefit map. You can add to that and have other items on there, so you have other elements, but that would really be whatever is appropriate for you in your context.
Okay, thank you. We've had two people asking how you would calculate disbenefits in the prioritization example you gave.
Oh yes, fantastic. Okay, yeah, very, very good question. Thank you. So this is a question of it depends, right? So if I have a disbenefit in my map, which is on a chain which is linking to my main objective, then I would consider it. I would include it in the calculation, because if you remember the prioritization process, it was all the branches had to add up to 100% at any point. So a disbenefit in that example would just be a negative branch, but the rest of the branches would still have to add up to a total of 100. And it makes sense, because if there's a disbenefit which is degrading the target that I'm trying to achieve, the others need to provide more to offset it. That's the one example. The other example is often, and this is quite often, it's the case that the disbenefits relate to something else and they're not directly linked to my main objective, in which case clearly then they wouldn't play a part in the prioritization. They'd just be captured so that they could be managed and mitigated as part of the change management project. Thank
you, Judge. Right, two people have mentioned the use of logic models. So one person has, Abu Zar Aziz, has said that they use logic models to show the journey from inputs to impacts. And Claire Ross has said that her stakeholders talk about logic models and theory of change frameworks. So this is probably going to confuse a lot of people, but can you just mention the link or the similarity between benefits mapping and these other modeling tools?
Okay, that's going to be, thank you for the question. That's going to be a bit more tricky one. There are various things in my head, and I'm not sure, I have come across logic model, but I'm not sure exactly I can recall. I think if logic model, specifically logic model is what I'm remembering correctly, a logic model has one part of it which is essentially the compressed version of a benefit map. It had the enablers, i.e. the projects, and the objectives. The benefit map is essentially that part of a logic model expanded. I think a logic model then has other elements in there, because it has, for example, resources and costs and so on shown. So I think as much as I could comment on that, because I'm not totally sure that's what that would be my comment on that. And I'm sorry if that doesn't answer your question.
Okay, well, I think, as I said before, if anybody doesn't feel that they've had their question answered, they're welcome to email me or through the APM Benefits SIG website, or Judge. And before we go, I would just like to thank Judge very much indeed for his time today. It's been really valuable. I've been doing benefit maps a while, and I've certainly learned some more stuff that I can use. So that's thank you for that, and thank you for your time, everybody that's attended today. Hopefully you have found it useful, and you will go away and start practicing yourself. I do need to just give a quick plug to an event coming up in the APM calendar. This is a risk management event on the 25th of January. It's an all-day event. If risk is your bag, then please do sign up for that if you can. And it just remains for me, please, to say thank you very much indeed for engaging with this webinar today, and thank you for all your inputs into the Q&A and into the polls. And we will publish the Q&A, including the questions that haven't been answered, along with the slides. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you all. Thank you.